The email came through at 11:14 on a Tuesday morning while I was between patients at the clinic. It was from a mortgage lender I had never contacted, thanking me for my application and informing me that unfortunately, based on my current debt-to-income ratio, I had been denied. I read it twice because I don't have debt. I haven't had debt since I paid off my student loans 14 months ago, ahead of schedule, by working doubles every other weekend for 2 years straight. My name is Jenna. I'm 29 years old. I'm a pediatric occupational therapist living in Richmond, Virginia. I had not applied for a mortgage. I had not authorized anyone to apply for a mortgage on my behalf, and I did not, as far as I knew, have a debt-to-income ratio that would disqualify me from anything. But someone had used my name, my social security number, and my financial history to try to buy a house, and the rejection letter was addressed to an address I recognized immediately. It was my parents' house in Roanoke. Let me go back because the email is the middle of the story. And the middle doesn't make sense without the beginning. I grew up in a house where money was a secret everyone pretended didn't exist. My father, Richard, was a contractor who had good years and bad years and talked about both of them the same way, which is to say he didn't. My mother, Carolyn, managed the household budget with the kind of tight-lipped anxiety that made you feel like asking for new shoes was an act of violence. I have one sibling, my older brother, Derrick. Derrick is 33, and for most of my life, he has been the center of every room he walks into. Not because he's loud, but because my parents made space for him the way you make space for something fragile and expensive. Derrick was supposed to be the one who made it. That was the family narrative. He was smart. Everyone agreed on that. He tested well. He interviewed well. He had the kind of confidence that teachers, coaches, and eventually employers responded to. When he got into UVA, my parents treated it like a national event. My mother cried at the dinner table. My father shook his hand the way men do when they want to hug someone but don't know how. The problem was that Derrick also had a habit of starting things and not finishing them. He changed his major 3 times. He took a semester off, and then another one. He graduated 2 years late, with a degree in communications that he described as versatile, and my father described as expensive. After graduation, he moved back home for what was supposed to be 6 months. That was 8 years ago. I went the other direction. I got my bachelor's in 3.5 years. I did my master's in occupational therapy, passed my boards on the first try, and moved to Richmond because a hospital system there was hiring and because it was close enough to visit home but far enough to breathe. I started building a life that made sense. I rented an apartment with good light. I adopted a cat named Oliver, who sleeps on my chest and has no opinions about my family. I saved money. I was careful with it in the way that people who grew up watching money be a source of pain tend to be. Here is the thing nobody tells you about being the responsible one in a family that doesn't reward responsibility. You don't get credit for it, you get expectations. When I was 24, my mother called me and said that Derrick needed help. He had started a landscaping business, she said, and he needed startup capital. She asked if I could lend him $4,000. She said, lend. She said it would be temporary. She said, your father and I would cover it if anything happened, which is the kind of sentence that sounds like a guarantee, but is actually a wish. I sent the money. It was never returned. The landscaping business lasted 5 months. When I was 26, my father called and said the roof was leaking, and the repair estimate was more than they had saved. He asked if I could cover half. I asked how much. He said $6,000. I sent it. I got a thank you text from my mother, and a framed photo of the family for Christmas that year, which I understood was supposed to make us even. When I was 27, Derrick called me directly for the first time. He said he was in a tough spot. He said some things hadn't worked out. He asked for $2,000 and promised to pay me back by the end of the month. I sent it. The end of the month came and went. I texted him about it once, and he responded with a thumbs-up emoji and nothing else. In total, by the time I was 28 years old, I had given my family somewhere around $15,000 in loans that were never repaid, never formally acknowledged, and never discussed in any honest way. I want to be clear. I'm not telling you this to demonstrate how generous I was. I'm telling you because I want you to understand the pattern, and more importantly, I want you to understand that I had already decided the pattern was over. I had stopped saying yes. I had started saying I can't right now, which is what you say when you're not ready to say no, but you've stopped being able to say yes. And the requests had slowed down the way water slows down when you close a valve. Not all at once, but gradually. Not without pressure building somewhere you can't see. That email from the mortgage lender was the pressure finding a new way out. I left my clinic that day at lunch. I sat in my car in the parking lot of a Panera Bread and called the lender directly. The woman on the phone was polite, in the way that customer service representatives are when they can tell you're about to hear something that's going to ruin your afternoon. She confirmed the application. She confirmed the address listed. She confirmed that the applicant had used my full legal name, my social security number, and my employment information. She said the application had been submitted online 2 weeks earlier and had been under review until the denial was issued that morning. I asked who had submitted it. She said she couldn't share that information due to their internal investigation policy, but that I should contact the credit bureaus. Immediately. I thanked her. I hung up. Then I pulled my credit report on my phone, sitting in that parking lot with a cold coffee in the cup holder and my hands shaking just enough that I had to type my password twice. There were 3 accounts I didn't recognize. A credit card with a $9,000 balance opened 14 months ago. A personal loan for $12,000 opened 11 months ago. And the mortgage application, which had been submitted 2 weeks ago and just denied. Total debt attached to my name that I had not created, not authorized, and not known about until that Tuesday in a Panera Bread parking lot, just over $21,000. Plus the mortgage application that, if approved, would have added another $240,000. I want to describe what that moment felt like, but I'm not sure I can do it accurately. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something quieter and older than anger. It was the feeling of looking at a lock you thought was secure and realizing someone had a copy of the key the entire time and they had been walking in and out while you were sleeping. I didn't drive to Roanoke that night. I want you to know that because I think a different version of me, a younger version, would have gotten on I-64 and shown up at my parents' door and demanded answers in the kind of loud, emotional confrontation that my family was built to survive. They were good at those. They had years of practice deflecting, minimizing, and waiting out anyone's anger until it turned into guilt. So instead, I went home. I fed Oliver. I opened my laptop and started building a case. First, I filed disputes with all 3 credit bureaus. Then, I created a folder on my desktop and named it with the date. Then, I screenshotted every account, every transaction, every piece of identifying information attached to the fraudulent accounts. I printed copies at the FedEx down the street because I didn't own a printer and because I wanted paper in my hands. I organized them in a binder with tabs, the way my supervisor at the clinic taught me to organize patient progress reports. Methodical, documented, undeniable. Then I called my mother. She picked up on the second ring. It was almost 9 at night, which is late for her. But she sounded awake. Maybe she had been waiting for this call the way you wait for a weather event you knew was coming. I said, "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly." There was a pause. Not long. Just enough for me to hear the television in the background go quiet. She said, "What is it, honey?" I asked her if anyone in the family had used my social security number to open financial accounts. I said it directly. I didn't soften it. I didn't say I think someone might have or I'm worried that maybe. I said, "Did someone in this family open accounts in my name without telling me?" Another pause. Longer this time. Then she said, "Jenna, your brother has been struggling. You know that he needed a little help getting on his feet. And we didn't think you would even notice for a while because you're doing so well and you don't even check those things regularly." I remember pulling the phone away from my ear and looking at it. Not because I was surprised exactly, but because the sentence she had just said to me was so precisely constructed to make me feel like the problem that I needed a moment to admire it before I could be devastated by it. "You didn't think I would notice?" I said. "Jenna, it was going to be paid back. Derek has a plan. Derek has a $21,000 plan that involves my credit score, my social security number, and accounts I never authorized. Don't be dramatic. It's not like we stole from you. Your family." That was the sentence. That was the one. "It's not like we stole from you. Your family." As if the word family was a password that unlocked every door, emptied every account, and forgave every violation before it even needed to be named, as if being related to someone meant your financial identity was a shared resource, like a Netflix login or a bag of sugar. I told her I needed to go. She said, "Jenna, please don't blow this out of proportion. Your father and I can sit down with you this weekend and explain everything. Derek feels terrible." I said I was sure he did. Then I hung up. I didn't call Derek. I didn't call my father. I sat on my couch with Oliver on my lap and the binder on my coffee table, and I made a decision I had been building toward for years without knowing it. I was not going to manage this inside the family. I was not going to negotiate. I was not going to accept a promise or a timeline or an explanation delivered over a kitchen table with my mother's meatloaf and my father's careful silence. I was going to handle this the way you handle it when a stranger steals your identity, because that's what had happened. The fact that the stranger knew my middle name and had been at my college graduation didn't change what it was. The next morning, before work, I filed a police report. The officer was a woman around my age who took my statement without visible reaction, which I appreciated more than I can express. She said, "Identity theft within families is more common than people realize, and many victims delay reporting because of guilt or loyalty." She said the word loyalty, and I felt something shift inside my chest, something load-bearing that had been cracking for a long time. That afternoon, I called a consumer protection attorney named Grace Kim. Her office was in downtown Richmond, 4th floor, and she had a plant on her desk that was somehow both alive and healthy, which I took as a good sign. She reviewed my documentation and was quiet for a while. Then she looked up and said, "This is clean. Everything is here. Who put this together?" I told her I had done it myself the night before. She nodded and said, "Good, that's going to matter." What Grace explained to me over the next hour was this. My brother had opened the accounts using my information, but he hadn't acted alone. The credit card application had used my parents' home address. The personal loan had listed my mother as a reference, and the mortgage application had included my father's bank statements as supplementary documentation, which meant he had participated in or, at minimum, had knowledge of the attempt. This wasn't one person making a desperate mistake. This was a family project. I sat in her office and let that settle. A family project. 3 people. The 3 people who were supposed to be the foundation of my life had sat down and decided to build something on top of my name without asking. They had looked at my good credit, my steady income, my years of careful decisions, and they had treated it the way you treat a vacant lot that nobody's using. The next 3 weeks were the hardest of my life. And also, in a strange way, the clearest. My mother called me 6 times. I answered once because Grace told me I could, and because I wanted to hear what they were going to say now that the police report existed. My mother's voice on that call was different from the one I'd grown up with. The casual authority was gone. She sounded smaller. She said, "Jenna, your father is very upset. He can't sleep. He says you've gone too far." I said, "How far should I have gone?" She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "You could have come to us first. We could have worked this out as a family. You had my social security number for 29 years. I said, "You worked it out without me just fine." She said, "You're going to regret this. You're going to wake up one day and realize you destroyed this family over money." And I remember thinking very clearly that she had it backwards. The money didn't destroy the family. The family destroyed the money. The money was just how I finally measured the damage. My father called once. His message was 4 minutes long. He talked about how hard things had been since his contracting business slowed down. He talked about the house needing work, about Derek trying his best, about how my mother worried about me every day. He said he was disappointed in me for going to the police. He said the word, disappointed. And I realized for the first time that it didn't land the way it used to. It hit the surface and slid off like water on a windshield. I had spent 29 years trying not to disappoint my father. And now that he'd finally said it, now that it was finally about something real, something I had done on purpose and with clear eyes, it didn't hurt. It was just a word. And he was just a man who had taken out a loan in his daughter's name and then called her to say he was disappointed that she noticed. Derek didn't call at all. Not once. I waited for it because I thought I owed him the chance, but it never came. What came instead was a text message 3 weeks after the police report that said, I know you're upset and I get it, but you have to understand. I was in a really bad place, and Mom and Dad said you wouldn't mind because you always help. I didn't think it would get this far. Can we just talk about it before the lawyer stuff goes any further? I read it sitting at my desk at the clinic between sessions. A 6-year-old boy with sensory processing challenges had just left my office after successfully tying his shoes for the first time. His mother had cried in the hallway, and then I looked at my phone and read my brother's text, and I thought about how strange it was that in one room, I had just watched a child learn to take care of himself for the first time, and in another room, a 33-year-old man was still asking someone else to absorb the consequences of his choices. I didn't respond to the text. Grace filed the case. The police investigation proceeded, and what came out over the following weeks through subpoenaed bank records and credit applications was worse than I had prepared myself for. The credit card had been used primarily for purchases shipped to my parents' address. Electronics. Furniture. A riding mower. The personal loan had been deposited into Derrick's checking account and spent within 4 months on restaurant charges, 2 separate trips to Atlantic City, and a $3,200 payment to an online poker site. The mortgage application was the final act, the big swing. They had tried to buy a rental property in my name, something Derrick was going to manage as a business funded by my identity, operated under my liability, and built entirely without my knowledge. I want to tell you about the moment that broke me. Not the email, not the credit report, not my mother's voice on the phone saying I was destroying the family. It was something quieter, and it came from the last direction I expected. My father's sister, my Aunt Linda, called me on a Thursday evening. She lives in Charlottesville, and we've never been close, mostly because my mother kept careful control of who we spent time with, and Linda was the kind of woman who asked uncomfortable questions at Thanksgiving. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. She said, "Jenna, I need to tell you something, and I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner." She said that 3 years ago, before any of the accounts were opened in my name, my parents had approached her with a similar request. They'd asked to borrow against her home equity line. She'd said no. They'd asked if Derrick could be added as an authorized user on her credit card. She'd said no again. And then they had stopped talking to her. She hadn't been invited to a family gathering in 2 years. She said, "I watched it happen to me, and I knew it would happen to someone else eventually. I just didn't do anything about it because I told myself it wasn't my place." She was crying by the end. I was too, not because I was angry at her, although a small part of me was. I cried because it meant the pattern was older than me. It meant that my parents hadn't stumbled into this out of desperation. They had a method. They had tried it before, and when it didn't work with Linda, they adjusted their approach. They didn't stop. They found a softer target, someone who loved them enough to not say no, someone they had spent 29 years training to say yes. I sat on my kitchen floor with the phone pressed to my ear and my back against the cabinets, and I cried for a long time. Oliver came and sat next to me and pushed his head against my hand, and I let him stay there because he was the only living thing in my apartment that had never asked me for anything I couldn't afford to give. The case took 5 months. The criminal charges against Derrick included identity theft and fraud. My parents were charged as accessories. Derrick's attorney tried to negotiate, and for a while, it looked like it might settle. But then the Atlantic City charges surfaced, and the judge's tone shifted in a way that even I, who knew nothing about courtrooms, could hear. Derrick pleaded guilty to 2 felony counts. He received 18 months of probation, mandatory restitution, and a permanent mark on his record that would follow him longer than any landscaping business or poker debt ever could. My parents received civil penalties and a restitution order. They were required to repay every dollar of the fraudulent accounts, plus my legal fees, on a structured timeline enforced by the court. My mother sent me a letter after the sentencing, not an email. A physical letter, written in the same handwriting that used to label my lunch bags in elementary school. It was 2 pages long. Most of it was what you'd expect. A long explanation that never quite became an apology. A detailed account of how hard things had been. A paragraph about how families are supposed to forgive each other. But there was one line near the end that I've kept. She wrote, "I hope one day you'll understand that everything we did was because we believed you were strong enough to handle it." I read that sentence 5 or 6 times, and then I understood something I hadn't fully grasped before. In my family, being strong was not a compliment, it was a job description. It meant you were the one they could take from without worrying that you'd collapse. My strength wasn't something they admired, it was something they consumed. The restitution payment started arriving in March. The first one was $1,400. It came on a Wednesday. I looked at the notification and felt almost nothing, which surprised me. I thought I would feel vindicated. I thought I would feel relieved. What I felt instead was something more like quiet. The kind of quiet you hear when a machine that has been running in the background for a very long time finally shuts off, and you realize how loud it was only after it stops. I want to tell you what happened with the house. Not the rental property they tried to buy in my name. My house, the one I'd been saving for before all of this started. After the case was resolved and my credit was restored, which took almost a year of disputes, letters, and patience I didn't know I had, I started looking again. The market had changed. Prices were higher. My savings had taken a hit from the legal fees, even with the restitution coming in. But I kept looking because I had learned something about myself during those 5 months that I hadn't known before. I was not someone who gave up. I was someone who had been trained to give in. And those are very different things. I found the house in October. It was in a neighborhood called Church Hill, one of the oldest parts of Richmond, a place where the streets are named after saints, and the porches are deep enough to hold a conversation. It was a row house with exposed brick and original hardwood floors, and a kitchen window that faced east, so the morning light came in while the coffee was still brewing. It wasn't big. It wasn't the house I had imagined when I was 27 and had a clean credit report and a future that felt uncomplicated. But it was mine in a way that nothing in my life had ever been mine before, because I had fought for it, not against a stranger or a system, but against the specific lie that loving your family means letting them dismantle you quietly. I moved in on a Saturday in November. My friend Lauren from the clinic helped. My neighbor from my old apartment lent me his truck. Aunt Linda drove down from Charlottesville with a casserole dish and a set of kitchen towels, and the kind of hug that communicates more than any minute sentence I could construct here. She stayed for the weekend. We painted the guest room a color called Dusty Sage, and drank wine on the porch and talked about things we'd never talked about. Not just the case, but the years before it. The ways our family had distributed its weight unevenly, and expected certain people to carry more without complaint. She told me something on that porch that I think about often. She said, "The hardest part isn't the betrayal. The hardest part is accepting that the people who were supposed to teach you about trust were the ones who made sure you couldn't recognize when it was being broken." I don't know if that's true for everyone, but it was true for me. Derek and I haven't spoken since his text message. I don't know if we will. Some days I think about calling him, not to forgive him exactly, but to understand him, to ask him what it felt like on the other end. To be the one the family propped up and then buried under their expectations until he couldn't tell the difference between help and theft. But then I remember the poker site. I remember Atlantic City, and I think that understanding can wait until I'm ready for it to cost me something, because understanding always does, and I've paid enough recently to be careful about what I spend next. My parents and I exist in a kind of careful distance. They send texts on holidays. I respond briefly. My mother asked to visit once, and I said not yet. She said she understood, which I doubt, but I appreciated that she said it instead of arguing. My father has not contacted me directly since his voicemail. I think he knows that whatever door was open between us closed when he submitted that mortgage application, and that a closed door is different from a locked one, but only if the person on the other side is willing to wait. I still work early mornings at the clinic. My first patient on Mondays is a 4-year-old girl named Maisie who has trouble with fine motor tasks. She's been working on buttoning her coat for 6 weeks. Last Monday, she did it. Every button from the bottom to the top while I watched and said nothing. Because sometimes the most important thing you can do for someone is let them prove to themselves what they're capable of without making it about you, her mother cried. Maisie looked confused about why everyone was so emotional about buttons. I think about that sometimes. How the things that matter most, the buttons, the boundaries, the quiet decisions made in parking lots and on kitchen floors, never look dramatic from the outside. They just look like someone finally deciding to hold on to what belongs to them. I kept the rejection email. the one from the mortgage lender that started all of this. It's in a folder on my laptop that I almost never open, but I know it's there. The way you know where the fire extinguisher is. Not because you expect a fire, but because knowing it exists means you've already decided you're not going to let anything burn down without a fight. My front door is red. I didn't plan that. The house came with it, and I thought about painting over it, but then I decided I liked it. Red isn't my favorite color. It's not calm or subtle or tasteful in the way I usually prefer, but it's visible. You can see it from the end of the block. It says, "Someone lives here, and they chose to be seen, and they're not going anywhere." If something in this story feels familiar, the family that treats your stability like a shared resource, the brother who takes, and the parents who help him take, the guilt that arrives before the bill does, the moment you realize that the people who were supposed to protect you have been quietly filling out forms with your name on them. I want you to hear me say this. You are not a bank account. You are not a credit score. You are not the sum of what you can provide to people who have decided that your success belongs to everyone except you. You are allowed to file the report. You are allowed to hire the lawyer. You are allowed to sit on your kitchen floor and cry and then stand up and make a decision that will change the shape of your family forever. Not because you wanted to, but because they already changed it and just never told you. You are allowed to keep what is yours, even if they call it selfish, even if they call it cold, even if your mother writes you a letter in the same handwriting she used on your lunch bags and tells you that she only did it because she believed you were strong enough. Especially then, because being strong enough is not the same as being available. And the day you learn the difference is the day you start building something that nobody can apply for without your permission. My red door is unlocked right now. Oliver is on the windowsill. The coffee is almost ready. And the only name on every account I own is mine. If this story stayed with you, share which part hit the hardest. Comment. Like. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today.